Alright guys, hope you're all doing well, hope you're all keeping safe. So the Title Update 10 PTS Patch Notes Phase 3 are now live. I believe Phase 3 of the PTS is actually live as of me making this video as well. This will be my third attempt at making this video because my audio keeps messing up and I'm not going to do it again. This is if this is the last one. But right, we're going to go over everything in this one. There's quite a lot of changes here, so let's just go straight through it. Increased rifle base ammo capacity by 50% to 280, from 280 to 420, so that's a huge increase there. Gunner specialization in placement talent weapon handling bonus reduced from 15 to 10%, and it just says the UI text has not been updated for phase 3. And then we got the NPC difficulty balance here, reverted the increases to base NPC status effect resistances in heroic and legendary difficulties during PTS phase 2. So they've basically gone back on what they did, and there's a comment here. One of the obvious advantages to running a PTS in multiple phases is we can be afforded the opportunity to try experimental ideas while receiving immediate feedback. We knew this would be a controversial change, but wanted to try it anyway in order to see how it would affect the endgame meta. Unfortunately, one of the things we failed to do was appreciate just how much a blanket resistance buff to NPCs would affect the viability of non-crowd control status effect builds, and I talked about this in yesterday's video. We never intended to release TU10 with any sort of nerf as significant as that, and fully intended to land somewhere much lower than the resistance value seen in PTS Phase 2. Despite those intentions, we agree these resistance changes are not in the best interest of the game, so they've been entirely reverted in favour of addressing the particular crowd control skills we feel are currently scaling too high in both uptime and frequency. More information on those changes can be found below in the skills portion of these patch notes. So, that's a huge change there, and we'll go over what changes are actually being made to specific skills in a moment. Loot containers as part of the living world activities now scale with global difficulty. Okay, so that's if you want to just go on heroic and run around the world and pick up crates, you can do that, and you're going to get crates that scale with heroic. Exotics. Developer comment: TU10's significant buff to weapon handling meant some exotic weapon mods no longer made sense or resulted in overtuned performance that no longer fit with the original design profile. We also took this opportunity to make improvements to underperforming exotic mods and configurations. Okay, so the Bighorn. Big Game Hunter talent, headshots now grant plus 2% headshot damage up from 1%, so that's quite a big buff there. Increased optimal range from 27 meters to 40 meters, that's a pretty huge buff. Optics mod increased from 0% to 30% headshot damage, and the magazine mod changed from 7% headshot damage to 10% reload speed. So that's a pretty big buff to the Bighorn, and from what I've seen, the Bighorn is actually going to be one of the best weapons coming with TU10. Mantis optics mod increased from 35 to 40% headshot damage, muzzle mod from 7% headshot damage to 5% critical hit chance, and now highlights weak points when aiming through the scope. Nemesis optics mod increased from 35 to 40% headshot damage, and the underbarrel mod reduced from 15 to 5% weapon handling. Overall, I'm happy about that. The Nemesis has effectively got a buff there. Chameleon adaptive instincts talent increased the number of hits required to gain the body shots buff from 60 to 75 and increased its weapon damage bonus from 80 to 90%. I don't like this because I believe the magazine on the Chameleon is only 60, so you're going to have to do 60, reload before you can then, proc this talent, and I just don't agree that you should ever have to reload really to proc a talent, right? Like that. I don't agree with that. Optics mod changed from 50% accuracy to 50% critical hit chance. Muzzle mod changed from 5% crit chance to 10% accuracy, and the underbarrel mod changed from 10% critical hit chance to 10% stability. So overall, we've had a bit of a accuracy nerf of 5% and then a 10% stability buff, it would appear. Merciless Ruthless binary trigger reduced the amplified weapon damage of 7 stacks from 900 to 500 and the explosion damage from 1200 to 500%. That feels to me like they've pretty much reverted it back to what it was, and I'm not overly happy about that. I felt as though people were saying that Merciless and the Ruthless were actually in a good place with Phase 2 and people were enjoying using it again. That's a huge nerf there. Muzzle mod reduced from 20% to 10% stability, underbarrel mod reduced from 20% to 10% weapon handling, and magazine mod reduced from 15 to 10%. And the comment they've made is Merciless was previously balanced for its very unwielding handling and compensated with very high burst damage. With access to much higher weapon handling, this is being toned down dramatically. Okay. Underbarrel mod for the Eagle Bearer is changed from 10% stability to 10% weapon handling. That's a good, that's a buff there, so that's good. Lady Death, Breathe Free talent, lowered the amount of maximum stacks from 40 to 32, and increased the damage amplification per stack from 60 to 75%. That's a pretty big buff there. Optics mod from 5% to 10% crit chance. Muzzle mod from 5% crit chance to 5% crit hit damage. And underbarrel mod changed from 5% crit damage to 500% melee damage. I'm not sure why the Lady Death needs to have melee damage. I can't remember what other talent was on it. And whether this will affect, I presume this will affect shields as well. So using a shield plus the Lady Death is going to maybe give you quite a lot of melee damage. Pestilence, muzzle mod changed from 10% stability to accuracy, 10% accuracy. Underwear mod from 10% weapon handling to 10% stability. So that's a bit of a, I believe that's a nerf possibly. Optics mod bonus for the chatterbox from 5% to 50% crit chance. Muzzle mod from 10% crit chance to 5% crit damage. Underbar mod from 15% to 10% weapon handling. Magazine mod changed from 10% reload speed to 10 rounds. And magazine base capacity reduced from 60 to 50%. So it appears that the chatterbox there wanted this to be more burst, I believe burst DPS rather than sustain. Liberty, the optics mod is changed from 5% crit chance to 5% headshot damage. Muzzle mod, 15% stability to 5% crit chance. Reload speed for the magazine mod, 15% to 15% weapon handling. So that's a pretty big buff there. And no longer highlights weak points when aiming. The Regulus muzzle mod changed from 5% crit damage to 20% accuracy. We'll have to see what people think about these changes. Me personally, I'm not overly happy with that chameleon change. Gear sets, Foundry Bulwark. Makeshift repairs, repair over time effect reduced from 40% of damage taken over 10 seconds to 20% over 15. Improved materials, talent now increases makeshift repairs from 20 to 30% over 15 seconds. And process refining now increases makeshift repairs for speed from 15 to 10 seconds. Okay. And it says, comment, the intention for Foundry Bulwark is for it to be the premier gear set for tanks or players looking to maximise their survivability, especially when paired with a shield such as the Bulwark. These values should better represent the level of survivability we intended this gear set to provide, as we still want situational awareness and smart position to be a factor in moment-to-moment decision making. The previous tuning during PTS Phase 1 and 2 meant even bad play couldn't be punished due to the overly generous damage reduction and self-repair strength. So overall, the damage taken over time has been reduced, but the amount of repairs you actually get back has been increased, it looks like. Brand sets, incoming repairs brand set base bonus increased from 15% to 20% on 511 Tactical and Richter and Kaiser GmbH. Weapons, the Carbine 7's had a damage increase from 7.6 to 8.7, the CTAR from 6.2 to 8.6, and the MPX has been nerfed from 20.8% to 17.7. Skills, Hive, this has come up a lot recently. Stinger Hive base damage reduced by 20%. Stinger Hive base bonus per skill increased from 10% to 20%. Comment, in order to make investing in skill tiers have a greater impact on Stinger Hive's damage, we slightly reduced base drone damage, while doubling the amount of damage gained with each skill tier. These changes will result in a net buff for dedicated skill builds of 10% increase in Stinger Hive drone damage at skill tier 6, compared to TU9 live values. The Restorer Hive now gains plus 5% drone flight speed per skill tier. So it says, comment, increases to the Restorer Hive's radius have the unfortunate effect of increasing the time it took for repair drones to reach their target, the further they were from the hive. Increasing drone flight speed with each skill tier should help offset that somewhat counterintuitive behaviour when taking advantage of the increased area of effect, and make the Restorer Hive a more reliable tool for healers. And then we're going to go over the actual skills that have been nerfed here. Chem Launcher, the Riot Foam Chem Launcher ensnare duration bonus per skill tier reduced from 20% to 10%, so that's a 50% nerf. Blind of Firefly, blind duration bonus per skill tier reduced from 20% to 10% as well. Blind of Firefly base blind duration reduced from 6 to 5 seconds. No notes about the actual cooldown on Firefly starting after the blind duration is ended, which is what they added in the previous phase, so there's nothing about that here. Pulse, the Banshee Pulse base confuse duration reduced from 5 to 4 seconds. Jammer Pulse, disrupt duration reduced from 4 to 3 seconds. And the Shock Trap, base shock duration reduced from 5 seconds to 3 seconds. In PvP it remains unchanged. And the Shock Trap, base radius increased from 2 meters to 2.5 meters. And I will go over this here, but I'll just quickly get to this part because that's quite a lot to go through there. PvP, gear sets, Foundry Bulwark. Makeshift repairs, repair over time effect reduced by 50% in PvP. Okay, that's a huge nerf, but it did need to be nerfed in PvP. Shotgun PvP damage reduced by 12.5%. Pistol PvP damage reduced by 10%. The Merciless and the Ruthless binary trigger amplified weapon damage and explosion damage reduced by 50% in PvP. Now, I can't talk too much about these changes because I don't play PvP, and I certainly haven't played any of the PTS for PvP, so I don't know about this. I think I've heard that the shotgun was maybe too much, but I've definitely not heard about the pistol and the Merciless here. Skills, The Firestarter Chem Launcher PvP damage reduced by 20%. Stinger Hive PvP damage increased by 20%, scaling up to 65% at skill tier 6. And it says PTS Phase 2 was minus 55 and minus 10% from PTS 2. Striker Drone PvP damage increased by 30%. Increased by 30%, yeah, it was a 20% increase from PTS 2. And the Assault Turret PvP damage increased by 55%. That's a 25% increase from PTS 2. And the comment to these changes are: we want dedicated skill builds to have multiple powerful defensive tools for area, denial, and control. In an attempt to replace the loss in bleed damage on the Stinger Hive during the first wave of the PTS, we overcompensate with a buff to the Hive's base drone damage that made it too powerful in the hands of non-skill builds. In order to address that, we lowered both the base damage and PvP modified damage of the Stinger Hive's drones, but doubled the amount of damage gained from skill tiers. The end result is a 55% or minus 55% reduction in Stinger Hive damage compared to PTS Phase 2 values at skill tier 0, and minus 10% at skill tier 6. Compared to TU9 live values, it remains a 20% to 65% increase in Stinger Hive damage in PvP. So, yeah, we'll have to see what people say about that. I've heard that the amount of damage the Stinger Hive can do is incredible. However, I do think that if you're a skill tier 6 player, your Stinger Hive should do a lot of damage because you're not going to be doing any weapon damage. And so we'll have to see how that works out. And then just going back here, this is a pretty long segment here talking about the skill changes, and I want to go over this developer comment here at the end of this one. So, comment: one of the core objectives for the design team when working on Warlords of New York was to make the endgame challenging again, and to put a greater emphasis on both personal and group build synergy. When we shipped Warlords of New York, we reduced the maximum power deltas on gear, which meant players could no longer overgear content like they could previously, which had the desired effect of making difficulty levels matter again. While we consider that a success, it has also had the unfortunate consequence of bringing to light a lot of degenerate NPC behaviour that was always present but entirely invisible, due to players being 4 to 5 times more powerful than the content they were doing prior to Warlords. This retuning of the RPG elements has forced us to audit the economics of our NPC encounters in more ways than one, in order to address unfair, overly punishing, or generally overtuned NPC archetypes. We consider all of this a good thing, because it keeps us honest as developers and the game as fair as possible without compromising what makes difficult content fun and rewarding in the first place: the challenge. With all of that said, two things were clear from the start of Warlords' launch. NPCs were too powerful, and player CC skills were scaling too high. One became a necessary evil to combat the other, and so we were reluctant to make any changes to CC skills before addressing the core issues of NPC balance. We believe the tuning of NPCs and their scaling across the different tiers of difficulty is in a much better, healthier place as of TU 9.1, and the generous amount of buffs to weapon damage and gear coming in TU 10 will only further tip the scales in the player's favour. In order to maintain a healthy balance between players and NPCs at the highest difficulties, and to preserve the integrity of our vision for endgame, we now need to address the power of CC skills. The changes outlined above were done to bring dedicated crowd controller builds more in line with what we expect their contribution to a fire team to be. CC effects act as powerful force multipliers, multiplying the strength of every individual on a team by both lowering and preventing incoming damage entirely, and enabling the group's damage dealers to do so with impunity. The current tuning of CC effects on live TU 9.1 lead to NPCs on even legendary difficulty being snared, blinded, disrupted, or confused for longer than the cooldown of the skill itself, giving them no opportunity to defend themselves or fight back once the CC effect wore off. And this is very, very true. This inevitably led to situations where the only time a group with a dedicated crowd controller would become under threat was when the NPCs reached immunity through diminishing returns from constant reapplication of CC effects, or the CC effect itself failing to register or apply an activation, and they're going to continue to address that more. More insidious and less visible consequence of having overpowered crowd control effects is that it discourages the desire or need for any other form of group composition that isn't one CC player and 3 DPS. Why consider bringing along a tank or a healer when your crowd controller essentially does the job of both? There is no need for a healer if the group never takes damage, and no need for a tank if the NPCs are always incapacitated or rooted in place. Fair point. It's important to stress that none of these changes were made to discourage bringing a crowd controller to a gunfight. In fact, we're more than confident that dedicated CC builds will remain the linchpin of any heroic or legendary group due to just how powerful these CC effects are despite the reduction in uptime. What we do envision happening, hopefully, is a reconsideration of what to bring to your next gunfight, and maybe that the value of healers and tanks will increase as the proposition of smoothing out the bumps between crowd control opportunities becomes something to consider. So you can see there, you can see what they're trying to go for here. And I might cover this in tomorrow's video. You can see what their vision is, and it makes sense. But they did way over nerf CC and that blanket nerf to everything, and they have reverted that, and they are making specific changes, which is good. And the changes they are making is also bringing in healers, and they're bringing in tanks. And I'm going to talk more about this in tomorrow's video. I think I'll do a video on this because I still think it needs to be done with healers and tanks. There's no changes being made to armor, so at the moment we're going to be able to do more damage to NPCs with TU10, but we're not going to be able to take more as players, and I still think that needs to be looked at. But that's it for today's video, guys. This is a very long one, so I do apologise if you have stayed around to the end. Really appreciate it. Really does help me out. And until tomorrow's video, guys, epic out.